What camera should I buy? This is a question that I get asked all of the time from a number of people, so today we're going to take a deep dive into the subject. Stay tuned. So this is a really big question, and it deserves a really big answer once and for all. Now, everyone is going to tell you, and rightly so, that it depends on what you're going to do with the camera. It isn't the scope of this video, nor could anyone make a video that would say definitively what camera is right for you in your specific and unique situation, but I can tell you what questions to ask of your camera and in what situations to help narrow the field. We're going to start by talking about different aspects of cameras so that you can get a good idea of what to look for and what sort of features would exist among them. We won't talk too much about specific models as that would go out of date rather quickly, where the information in this video is geared towards the features that are inherent in all cameras so it has the best opportunity to remain relevant. This video is going to contain a lot of information, so I've broken it down into various steps, and if you would prefer, in the description below I have made links to the different sections of the video so that you can more easily ingest and reflect upon it. Let's go over some key terms. Camera resolution. You may have also heard it called shooting ratio or aspect ratio. Cameras generally have a few of them. For instance, you might see 1080p or 720p on an HD camera, where the picture would typically measure 1920 by 1080 pixels vertically. The P on 1080p, for those of you out there that are wondering, would be progressive as opposed to 1080i, which would be interlaced. Basically, progressive, you see the entire image all at once for every frame, and then interlaced is cutting the image into horizontal lines and showing you pieces of each from one to the other. Progressive is going to be better in almost all instances. Outside of that, you would be getting into 4K, 6K, or even 8K depending on the camera, which is going to change the overall size of the video and make it bigger. Going with a higher media resolution doesn't necessarily add up to the quality of the image, just the size of the image is going to be put out. This can be great for VFX if you were to shoot 4K, for instance, and then present in 1080p. You could then crop in on the images and allow for shots to be generated from a single shot. Frame rates. The standard for most film is going to be 24 frames per second, which is a holdover from old Hollywood movies, though most adjust for the rolling shutter of modern cameras and will shoot at 23.976 frames per second for reasons that are outside of the scope of this video. The eye perceives things closer to 30 frames per second, and if you are looking for slow motion video, then you're going to go upwards of thousands of frames per second, but obviously the cost of the camera is going to go up with it as it's harder for the camera to operate at those speeds. Compression. Think of compression like this. If you have a photograph and you need to put it into a box, and that box is smaller than the photograph, then you're going to have to fold or bend it in such a way that it can be made to fit into that box. That is going to distort the image in some way from what it looked like when it was the whole image. And some methods are going to be less destructive than others. A camera is capturing the world and putting it into a digital file, and that compression is the size of the box that it's putting it into. If the camera will only shoot H.264 and that is a much smaller box, then the picture will be more effective than, say, a ProRes or DNx HD, which is closer to the RAW, which is the actual size of the image to begin with. ISO is not an acronym for anything, but it is going to represent the sensor's sensitivity to light. If you have a really high ISO camera, like the A7S III with the ISO in hundreds of thousands, then you're going to be able to capture images with much less light going into the lens for better low light shots. That's being said, it does produce more grain, so you want to have a plan to not have it all the way up all the time. Though with the applications like Neat Video, you can take some of that noise down dramatically. At a certain point, it isn't all going to be coming out, so you want to be careful with it. Color subsampling. You can think of this resolution as the resolution for your color. Common options are going to be 444, 422 or 420. With 444 color sampling, you would have 4 pixels displaying 4 independent colors, which would render it much larger files because there's more information there. 422, they're basically taking 4 colors and they're breaking it down into 2 different colors and using a mix of each color so that those colors present, and that's going to obviously lower your resolution. 420 would have a similar drop in resolution, but for every color, 4 color pixels, you're getting 1 mix of all of those colors. Bit depth refers to how many colors the camera is capable of recognizing. If you remember 8-bit games from Atari, when they jumped up to 10-bit, then you got a pretty good example of this. There's going to be much more colors, there's going to be cleaner lines, you're going to have a lot more detail. More information equals better quality photos. Sensor size. You're going to want every bit of it that you can, and that would look like a full frame sensor. Basically, it's going to take everything you got because the sensor takes up the full frame. From there, it can be cropped into different sizes. The upside is that they're less expensive when they're cropped. The downside is that you're losing pieces of information on the edges of the image. DSLR versus camcorder. DSLR stands for Digital Single Lens Reflex, and they are basically stills cameras that are capable of shooting video at the same sort of quality that they take photos. Not every one of them is going to be capable of shooting video, so you want to make sure that yours will do what you want it to do, but they are very popular these days. The pros of something like that, you get great picture quality, relatively cheap, and it has interchangeable lenses, which is something that can be hard to find. Cons, the video is usually an afterthought compared to a camcorder, which is predominantly built for video, so you miss out on higher-end video features like zebra stripes, focus peaking, that sort of thing. And they also generally max out at 30 minutes of recording time. Camcorder, however, are cameras that are built entirely around video. They're used as broadcast cameras all over the world, and some are more expensive and better cameras than you can get with a DSLR type camera. Pros, you can record video for as long as you want, or as long as you can power the camera. They can come with a lot of really handy features for video production as well. The cons, they're generally more expensive, they're bulky, and they're harder to take places. The image quality suffers as the price goes down, so you have to pay a premium to get DSLR quality video. Buying versus renting. Now, there are some girls that you put a ring on right away, and there are some girls that you just want to have fun with. It's the same with cameras. Believe me, if I could shoot with an Alexa every day of the week, I probably would, but she would ruin me, she would take every dime that I got, she would leave me broken in the street, and she would cheat on me with my best friend. They come with a lot of upkeep. It's probably going to necessitate buying a bunch of infrastructure around the camera, since apparently nothing is ever good enough for them. The files are so large that it becomes a chore to go through. Unless you buy a much better computer or you're proxy editing everything, it can be pretty difficult to do on a lesser machine. You pretty much have to rent them out if you want to recoup your money, and then you're always going to have to worry about what's happening when you're not around. Unless you're shooting huge corporate gigs every day, or you're renting it out and it's hard to stomach the thousands and thousands of dollars that it would take to get that thing up and running. Even then, it's a piece of electronics that depreciates in value year after year, so be careful when buying an Alexa. You need a camera that is manageable, that you can get up and run and shoot something at a moment's notice, that works for 80% of the stuff that you're shooting, that doesn't cost a lot to maintain. You need something that is cheap enough that it allows for a good return on investment without having to worry about destroying your credit or raising your insurance premiums if it breaks. It needs to be good enough to be able to greenlight personal projects. It establishes a baseline for your quality of work that you're putting out, and not the high end of what you can shoot for. Then, no matter what, you have an option that doesn't put you below that certain point. That's the camera that you buy, and then you cheat on it with an Alexa and just go and rent those anytime you need. Camera recommendations. Now, let's talk about the types of customers that are buying. There are people that are making home movies. which if you just had a baby and you're trying to capture more of their early years, you can get by with a pretty inexpensive camera, maybe a Canon Rebel series camera or a handheld camera that, you know, might be pretty nice for you. Your needs are pretty simple, and you could probably fix that with just a better phone. If you are running your own vlog, you probably want a pretty simple DSLR. I know Casey Neistat used to, or at least used to use a Canon 70D for quite a while. I've used that camera and it was fantastic, but far enough from the bleeding edge that it was easy to run and gun with. It has a great autofocus for when you're running both in front of and behind the camera, and it has a pretty decent low lighting capabilities. You would be best suited with a DSLR like a Canon 1DS or a Panasonic GH5, or on the higher end, maybe a 70D or an 80D on the lower end. Videographer. Now you're counting on this camera to do your business, but you're not filming movies. You probably want to lean towards a nice camcorder like a Canon C300 or an FS7. It should pay itself off as you use it. You know, if you're just starting out with your business, I'd probably recommend like a high-end DSLR like a GH5 to start with, and then building the things around the camera. That way you will, you know, be better spending your money over time. The right grip and lighting equipment can do wonders for what you're trying to do and get you much closer to those higher end cameras. A full-time filmmaker. Now you're definitely going to want a better camera than any of the other options group. Probably renting a camera would be a better investment with your time. You probably didn't get into the position without knowing a thing or two about cameras, but you may not have all of the money right up front. I would say for big projects like that, you probably want to just rent. How to buy your first camera. Filmmaking and photography are lifelong pursuits. Your first camera is going to be a stepping stone. You'll make mistakes and even drop it, so it should be thought of as a disposable. There's always going to be a next one, and you need to get your right now, not the perfect camera. You aren't going to be able to afford much of anything. You probably don't know what you're looking for, and you should plan for obsolescence. I've always recommended getting your first camera used, and you know, if you're getting a lot more bang for your buck and you're able to buy outside of your market worth, then you know, it's going to be much more favorable on your budget. At least for me, there's also the stigma of using it right away because it feels too pristine. So getting the used one, you know, would fit my needs a little bit better. You know, and then you just roll that into buying a different one. You know, you can sell off the one that you have, and then you can kind of keep going over and over and selling them. So you want to get something that's going to maintain some value. You might not ever own a $100,000 camera, but if you spend your money correctly, then you can still have a really nice camera. The next steps. So you followed me this far into the abyss, then you should have a good understanding, or at least a better understanding, of all of the notable features that come on a camera and the ups and downs of each of those features. Now it's time for you to pick and choose what's right for you and what has the best of all of those features for you. For me, I decided on a Canon 77D because it was the same sensor size as the 80D, and I am saving up for a nicer one, so I didn't want to blow all of my money right away. It's important to note that your camera is not nearly as important as what you're pointing it at. One of the most viewed videos of all time is going to be the Zapruder film, and that was shot handheld without any lights on 8mm film. Movies have been shot on iPhones and gone into festivals. Don't obsess about it, and, you know, get something that allows you to get up and go and, you know, rent when you need more power. Thanks so much for staying with me the whole time. I know that it was a large subject, but it was a pleasure as always, and you have a wonderful evening.